Hey everyone, it's Mayor Robert Garcia, and I want to again welcome you to this another edition of Accelerate Long Beach and this really great forum that is happening really about projects that are going to change the way our city looks and the way people live every single day. We know that there are cityscape-changing projects happening right now, coming out of the ground across our city. We have dozens and dozens of really exciting projects that are really about housing, about creating neighborhoods, and about bringing in business. And so I think you're going to learn a lot about those today. You're also going to hear from our Office of Economic Research at Long Beach State, which is a great partner with us here at the city. And please know that for us, we want to develop this community. We are excited about economic development. We are excited when developers come in and want to build community. And at the same time, we're working with them to ensure that we put protections in place, that we're building housing that is affordable. As you see all across Midtown right now coming out of the ground is great new housing stock for all types of folks, which is really important for us as a community. So let's continue to build and welcome to Accelerate Long Beach.
Accelerate Long Beach Real Estate and Development is brought to you by the City of Long Beach Economic Development Department, the Downtown Long Beach Alliance, the California State University Long Beach Office of Economic Research, and the Long Beach Economic Partnership. To learn more, visit lbep.org.
Welcome to Accelerate Long Beach, the quarterly update and forum from the Long Beach Economic Partnership. I'm Haley Munguia, editor of the Long Beach Business Journal. I'll be your host today, and later on I'll be moderating a live Q&A panel with our economic experts. So if you have any questions you'd like me to ask after our economist presentations, go ahead and submit them in the chat. Over the past several years, Long Beach has experienced massive growth in real estate development. The build-out of thousands of residential units and millions of square feet of commercial real estate help attract and retain professional workers and world-class corporations to our waterfront metropolis. Real estate development accounts for about 17% of gross regional product in the Long Beach area. This massive industry fuels itself. Businesses and developments attract more business and development, with that growing ecosystem building a higher quality of life for everyone. Today, we'll hear from city leaders, economists, and real estate industry experts who will discuss what's driving this massive growth, and we'll take a look at the people and projects that are shaping Long Beach's skyline, those that are currently under construction, and we'll take a peek into the future with some upcoming developments. The economic forecasts and presentations by our experts will be up in just a few minutes, but take a look at some recently completed projects that are expanding housing, attracting exciting startups, allowing existing businesses to expand, and putting Long Beach on the map for more future development from big investors.
For many decades now, the City of Long Beach has been redefining itself from a planning perspective, from a policy perspective, to encourage responsible investment, smart growth, sustainable growth and development in the city. Anderson Pacific was invited by the City of Long Beach, actually the former redevelopment agency, to invest in downtown Long Beach years ago. So in 2004, we toured several sites and found the one that we're sitting at today, and looked for a site that would reinvest and revitalize the downtown, which is really the plan that RDA had and had been enacting for several years. And so hearing the history of success that Jim Anderson had over the years in downtown Los Angeles and nationally, and having transformative projects, we found this site really as a catalyst for this area. It is the East Gateway into downtown Long Beach. Saw it as an important and critical component to the revitalization of this area in the East Village Arts District, and as a gateway marker for the city as the last unobstructed view of the ocean in downtown Long Beach.
Nowhere else really do you have any high rises and the kind of quality of life in Long Beach within the Southern California region. You have San Diego on the Bay, obviously LA inland, and so forth and so on, but really on the Pacific Ocean, Long Beach is it as far as a metropolis.
We truly view this project as a beacon for new development and investment in Long Beach, and have found that many of our contemporaries, again, want to come see Long Beach, are interested in this area. But again, it's, I think, a testament to the credentials of the companies involved, their ethic and staying power with respect to investment, their attention to detail collectively, and their input on wanting to deliver a high-class community that is beneficial and additive to the area around it, that is truly contextual. What we found is that those who live in the community want to have natural light, access to fresh air, the types of amenities that have low VOC gases and so forth, type of sustainable living that one would have and aspire to be. And so we are very proud to deliver this first LEED campus, this first LEED Gold neighborhood development campus for the City of Long Beach.
a lot of firsts with this building. Between its height and its depth, the level of amenities, the quality of it, the richness of the building itself, it provides a unique experience the city has never experienced, and we are thrilled to finally bring it to fruition.
Long Beach is a sleeping giant with immense untapped potential. Long Beach has diverse, high-quality neighborhoods, and there's high demand for additional housing. So, there's tremendous opportunity for developers like City Ventures to bring in high-quality housing solutions to town. At City Ventures, we don't just build homes, we create new neighborhoods.
Our mission is to partner with California cities and identify infill locations and build homes designed for the way people live. Long Beach is the most affordable beach destination for homeowners looking for new residential housing. The anticipated release of our next neighborhood has already garnered a substantial interest list.
We're here in front of the Huxton, right at the entrance to the East Village. Huxton is a solar-powered, all-electric townhome community. It was actually the first new townhome community in downtown Long Beach in over a decade. Huxton is an example of contemporary housing that encourages energy independence and adds vital homeownership opportunities here in downtown Long Beach.
We pursued the second and PCH property for probably 6 years before we undertook development. It was previously an old hotel, and we just fell in love with the intersection and the neighborhood and really just the quality of the community. And so we were something we took a lot of time in pursuing, and we're finally able to convince the landowner to partner with us, and we couldn't be happier. The mayor and the community and Susie Price really helped us to focus on what the community needed. We had a number of public meetings early on to really talk about the plan, and we got a lot of comments, and we're able to incorporate those comments into the project. When we started the project, Marina Drive was really just a two-way street with no parking on it, and the city got really excited about what that streetscape could look like and really helped partner with us to create a very walkable street along the water. Susie Price really became a partner with us, and through her engagement with us and helping to guide us through the community, really becoming a voice for the community of what really wanted to be at the project, and helping us to steer through the community and the city, we couldn't be more pleased with that partnership.
I think the City of Long Beach is business friendly. We're at the table with a lot of businesses and future businesses very early on, sometimes before they've submitted for plan check. And we hear about their experiences with other cities and all the struggles and the hurdles they have with other cities. And so I think we've come a long way. There's always more that we can do, but we've come a long way in making sure our fines and fees and all those things that are associated with submitting on time or having a delayed submission, all those things are reasonable and within the range of costs associated with starting a new business within the Southern California area. The community absolutely loves Second and PCH. It has elevated the standards around here in terms of retail experience and dining experience. And I think what we've heard from a lot of people that this development has kind of turned the corner for us as a city in terms of connecting us better with Orange County. And former Mayor O'Neill called me the first day that Whole Foods was open because she was here shopping, and she called and she said, and left me a message and said, I never thought a day would come that we would have a Whole Foods and this amazing shopping center right here in Long Beach. Thank you for making that happen. And I echo her sentiment 100%. This is a really great space. My family and I love it. We come here often. We've come here to do photo shoots before. We enjoy all the different backgrounds and the textures that you see all around you when you walk. There's just from the architectural and design standpoint, there's wood, there's flowers, there's vibrant colors, there's subdued, mellow colors. All of that is just very inviting. What I love about it is that there's something for everyone here. It's a vision of what the city can hold and the capacity that we have in terms of what we can accommodate.
Our first presentation and forecast today is from Dr. Robert Kleinhens. He's the principal economist and founder of the firm Kleinhens Economics. He's also a lecturer on the faculty of the economics department at our very own Cal State Long Beach. A leading voice on the economy at the national, state, and local level, Dr. Kleinhens taps over 30 years of experience to present his outlook for the economy and its leading industries and to offer his perspectives on leading policy issues. Dr. Kleinhens has held several positions over the course of his career, most recently as economist and executive director of research with Beacon Economics. He previously served as the chief economist for the Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation and deputy chief economist with the California Association of Realtors, and held academic positions at USC, UC Riverside, and Cal State Fullerton. Dr. Kleinhans is known for his extensive knowledge of the economy and economic policy. He's a frequent contributor to the media and has appeared on CNBC, Bloomberg, and NPR, and has been quoted in news outlets including the Wall Street Journal, the Los Angeles Times, and of course the Long Beach Post and Business Journal. Welcome, Dr. Kleinhans.
Hello, I'm here to talk about the U.S. and California outlook on behalf of Cal State Long Beach, our Office of Economic Research. So, we've now gone nearly 2 years having to cope with the pandemic, the disruption that it's brought to our lives, the health problems that it's caused so many people, so much calamity. The U.S. economy took a huge hit, the California economy took a huge hit, but here we are as we close out 2021, and I'm here to tell you that the national and the state economies are making significant progress in stepping forward from the pandemic. So I'd like to walk you through a few numbers over the next few minutes. We will take a look at the U.S. economy. We'll look a little bit at California and its regions. This particular program focuses on real estate, so I'll spend a little bit of time talking about the state picture for housing, and then we'll wrap things up and take a look ahead to 2022. So I just really want to lead off by making the observation that the U.S. economy is in an expansion mode at this point. As the figure shows here, GDP actually plunged in the first half of 2020. But the official end of the recession was in May of 2020, and in the second quarter of 2020, we actually began our recovery. It was in the second quarter of this year when we actually surpassed the previous peak for GDP. And that's what you're looking at over on the left-hand side, where the red bars represent the recession. And so in the quarters since then, we've seen significant gains in economic activity. So that's a good sign. We just need to keep that in mind. And over on the right-hand side, you're looking at annual rates of growth in GDP. We took a big hit in 2020. All of that was front-end loaded to the first half of the year. For this year, even though our GDP forecasts have been downgraded as we've moved our way through the year, we're still looking at a GDP forecast of 5.5%, which would be the fastest rate of annual growth in the U.S. economy since 1984. So we're still looking at this year as being an extremely good year as we further recover from the pandemic. And then next year in 2022, we continue to see heightened levels of economic activity at 4% growth. Do keep in mind that the long-term growth rate of the economy, or typical growth rate that we would expect for the U.S., is about 2%. So we're going to be about double that even next year as we move further from recovery and into expansion. So much of the growth that we've seen over the past year and a half or so has come from activity on the consumer side. The consumer sector makes up about 3/4 of the economy, 2/3 to 3/4 of the economy. It varies from one quarter to the next. And so we've seen strong gains in consumer spending. And as the economy has reopened, more and more consumption of services is taking place. And that's actually the bigger of the two categories of consumer spending that occur here in the U.S. economy. And then, of course, we're going to hear later on about how much we're buying goods and how that's contributing to the backlog of activity at the ports here in Southern California. But the bottom line is that the consumer sector is continuing to spend. That's driving the economy forward. And the outlook for this holiday season, which we're in the midst of right now, is quite good. The expectation is that there will be record levels of holiday spending. That while we've heard about the supply chain problems, those probably are going to hit the smaller stores more so than the bigger chains that have their own sort of internal supply chains. So be that as it may, we expect to also see significant online sales volume. So all of that should contribute to a really good closeout for the year 2021 in terms of retail sales and the overall economy. We're a little bit concerned about the fact that the Omicron variant is now disrupting activity, and it's perhaps going to disrupt some of the holiday travel that people expected to engage in, but that all remains to be seen. So the consumer sector is doing well. We turn now to the business sector, to investment spending. And so it took its hit in the first part of last year during the worst days of the pandemic. But by the third quarter of last year, we saw business investment spending turn around. And the last three bars on the left-hand side that you see, the gray, yellow, and blue, show that overall investment spending or business fixed investment spending has been up throughout the year. It's not because of investment in structures. As you can see there, investment in structures really has gone nowhere, and that makes sense given what's happened with the low level of occupancy and offices and so on. But we have been seeing gains in equipment spending. We've been seeing gains in intellectual property expenditures. And so these things have been carrying the other segment of the private sector of the U.S. forward. So we've seen that the business sector continues to spend. And between the business sector and the consumer sector of the economy, you're talking about maybe 85% of the economy right there. So then we look at trade. Trade is the third component of the U.S. economy that we track. And I'm sure you know that we import more than we export. For every $2 of import goods, we export about $1. And that's been a very consistent pattern for many, many years. As our U.S. economy has recovered and has recovered somewhat more quickly than many of its major trading partners, we've seen that import activity has really accelerated compared to exports, which have essentially been flat. And so as a result, the trade deficit has grown to $1.3 trillion. So this is kind of a mixed story because on the one hand, the trade deficit is a cause for concern, but on the other hand, the mere fact that we're importing more goods really speaks to the fact that our economy is on the mend, that incomes are on the rise, that people have the ability not just to buy consumer goods that are made domestically, but they're also in a position to buy imported goods, and that's exactly what they're doing. And that's part of the reason why we're seeing the backlog of ships that need to be offloaded in the San Pedro Bay. I know my colleague, Dr. Steinmetz, is going to have more to say about that. So then we take a look at the fourth component of the U.S. economy, government spending, and here we're focusing mainly on what's happening at the federal level. Last year, that's to say in fiscal year 2020, the U.S. Federal government had a record-setting $3.2 trillion budget deficit. And you can see the sea of red on the screen. So in the most recently completed fiscal year that ended on September 30th, the Congressional Budget Office expected it would be another $3 trillion budget deficit. That's what you're looking at there, that second bar from the left. But in fact, when all was said and done, it was a little bit below that at $2.8 trillion. Still very large numbers. We're talking about, when we talk about the size of budget deficits, we look at them relative to the amount of GDP in the economy. And these last couple of years, we're talking about budget deficits that are 14, 16% of GDP. A more normal budget deficit is about 4 to 4.5% of GDP. Well, within the next couple of years, we're going to be back to normal, as you can see in the middle of the screen. So that run-up of budget deficits over the last couple of years in response to what's happened in the economy, which in turn was in response to what's happened with the pandemic, that's going to abate, and we'll move forward with a budget situation for the U.S. government that's a little bit more tractable. So you've heard a lot about inflation, and I'm not surprised. Inflation at present is as high as it's been in a couple of decades. So there are a lot of concerns about inflation, but if we step back from the headlines and we take a look for a moment, we need to make the following observations. Number one, whenever the economy is in recovery, we often find that there are supply constraints and things like that that give rise to higher levels of inflation for a period of time. And that's what this figure shows here. It shows the high levels of inflation on the far right-hand side, but it also shows that as we were recovering from the Great Recession about a dozen years ago, we also had elevated levels of inflation. Things are compounded now by the fact that we've got these supply chain problems, but those are going to be worked out in time. And when you take a look at some of the basic things like the price of oil, which gives rise to the price of gasoline, in time, the price of oil is going to retreat to what we think is going to be long-term normal. So many of these other prices are going to retreat in time to what we think is going to be long-term normal. And so while we're looking at modest single-digit inflation rates this year and maybe next year, you can see the table on the right-hand side of the screen. When you account for energy, which I just spoke about, and when you account for food, the overall rate of inflation is actually going to be rather modest, in the neighborhood of 2.6% in 2022. So I'm fairly bullish on this. And you can see, you know, nobody's using the word transitory anymore. And to talk about single-digit inflation of the sort that we're looking at, if you have any kind of long-term memory, you'll know what it was like to live in the United States through double-digit inflation. We're talking about inflation rates that I think are very manageable over the near term and that will come back down to earth over time. So of course, inflation is one of the components to interest rates. And so what you're looking at now are the key interest rates that we track at the national level. The Fed funds rate, which is the policy rate that the Fed sets, is down there at the bottom. It's still rock bottom. There's an expectation that the Fed funds rate may lift as we move into 2022. Then you're looking in the middle at the yield on the 10-year Treasury, and then above that you're looking at the 30-year mortgage. You know, let's keep in mind that all of these interest rates are rock bottom compared to any kind of historical norm. And also keep in mind that whenever the economy gets going, as it is right now, when we see that kind of economic lift happen, we also see interest rates rise. That's also the time when the Fed typically increases its key policy rates. Now, putting all that together, I think we all expect that interest rates are going to rise in 2022, but for good reasons. It's because the economy is growing. There's some elevated levels of inflation that we already spoke about. The Fed's going to be taking its foot off the gas with its changes in policy. So we'll see interest rates rise, but the expectation is that those rises are going to be quite modest. The yield on the 10-year is maybe going to go up by 1/2 of a percentage point from this year to next. So these are very manageable changes in interest rates. The interest rate environment, I think, is going to continue to be very favorable for investment spending, whether it's on the part of business, on the part of government, or on the part of households. Now, of course, we've had record-setting activity with the stock market over the last couple of years. You know, as interest rates lift, we're going to expect to see a little bit more volatility in the stock market than we've seen historically. But all in all, there's really no reason to expect anything more than a continued move along the trajectory that we've seen over the last few years. As the economy is going better and better, or improves in its performance, we'll see that the stock market's going to reflect that. You know that there are going to be occasional corrections and the like, of course, and I'm not a stock market economist, I'm a Main Street economist, but you know, those who look at the stock market and adopt a buy and hold strategy are going to ride out any kind of correction that may occur. So we've talked about the overall economy. We've talked about inflation, and we've talked about interest rates. There's a lot of concern right now about what's happening in the labor market, and for good reason. So to begin with, what you're looking at here is the unemployment rate for the U.S. and for the U.S. Overall, the non-farm jobs number that we typically track and look at. The unemployment rate's come down markedly compared to a year and a half ago when it peaked at 14.8%. So that's really good news. We're now at 4.2%. And the benchmark that we use when we talk about the unemployment rate and how low it can go is called the natural rate of unemployment. The official natural rate of unemployment is actually 4.5%. So oddly enough, even though we're in recovery in the labor market, we're already below the natural rate of unemployment. So that's going to require some explanation. I'll get to that in a second. So the other thing to notice here is that during the early stages of the pandemic, we lost over 20 million jobs. That's what you're looking at on the left-hand side of the screen. We had 152.5 million jobs in February of last year. It slipped to 130 million jobs by April of last year. So we've clawed back many of those jobs. We still are about 4 million jobs short of where we were before the pandemic, but the expectation is by the time we get it through the first half of next year, we'll recover the jobs that we lost during that time period. So I think the job growth figure is going to sort itself out. But this whole story about the unemployment rate is something that kind of requires some additional attention. So even though the unemployment rate is down to 4.2%, we still have 2 million fewer people in the labor force than we had before the recession. So you've heard a lot in the news about this story of the Great Resignation. Lots of people are quitting their jobs, and nobody's quite sure why they're quitting their jobs. Well, here's some food for thought, and here's some data to consider. We did have a record high level of quits in the most recently reported number for October of 2021. 4.1 million people quit work in October of 2021. Let's compare that to the average over the last 10 years. 2.9 million people on average quit work monthly going back over the past 10 years. When you compare the most recent number with that historical average, the difference is about 1.2 million people, which is about 0.8% of the entire labor force. So these are large numbers in and of themselves, record high number for October of 2021. It's a relatively small share of the overall labor force, so I think that should give us some reassurance that, you know, the world's not tumbling down. And when you take a look at the relationship between the number of quits and the number of jobs, they're very highly correlated, which means that when you've got the record-setting kinds of monthly job gains that we've seen over the last several months, it shouldn't be any surprise that we're also getting record levels of quits, because these are great opportunities for people. It's a great time for people to change jobs that who may have been hunkered down and waiting out the worst days of the pandemic. So I don't think this is a huge cause for concern. I do think that part of this is a pandemic effect. We have separations that are occurring in selected industries. There's some industries that are having a hard time filling positions, like restaurants and the like. Well, if you've got a very tight labor market and people who might work in those industries can get better paying jobs in other industries like delivering for Amazon, that probably explains why it's hard to fill positions in the restaurants. And of course there's more to it than that, but it just gives you a sense that, you know, there are some pandemic effects that are still having to play out. And we do have some workers in segments of our labor force that are slowly re-entering, either because of situations at home or maybe situations otherwise that are maybe not out of their control. Maybe they're waiting for the start of the new year. So all of these things may still be affecting that overall level of quits. But then there's more to it, I think, than that. And it's the long-term forces that I'd like to point out that I think have also played a role in contributing to this large number of quits and has contributed to this story on the Great Resignation. Look at the demographics. Look at the age cohorts that are in our labor force right now. Think about the labor force as a pipeline. And at the entry point of the pipeline, you've got the youngest workers. Exiting are going to be the oldest workers. And so as we work our way backwards from age cohort by age cohort, it's the boomers who are leaving the labor force as they retire or wind down their careers. It's a huge number of people, a large share of the labor force. Okay, so we've got large numbers of exits from the labor force on the exit part of the pipeline. Coming into the pipeline at the other end, you've got Generation Z, which is a relatively small age cohort. And so the numbers of people who are coming into the pipeline are not as large as the numbers of people who are leaving the pipeline. Of course, we don't want to overlook Gen X. We don't want to overlook the millennials. They're in the middle of that pipeline, so their situation's not really going to change the story a whole lot. But I do think that what we're looking at right now is not just a pandemic effect, not just an economic cycle effect, but also a long-term effect where we're probably going to be looking at a long-term labor shortage, not just nationally, but also here in California. It's almost inevitable. I mean, it's baked in the cake because we're looking at demographics. We're talking about, looking through the rear view mirror at the numbers of people who either were born in a previous year or who came to the United States through immigration. The bottom line is that, in particular, the exits from the labor force on the part of the boomers might be intensified by the pandemic, and no matter which way you look at it, I think we're looking at a long-term shortage of labor that we're going to have to grapple with one way or another. So now let's take a look at California. And so like the US, California's unemployment rate shot up during the early stages of the pandemic. It reached 16%. It actually quadrupled in the span of just a couple months. Well, right now it's less than half that. It's at 7.3%. The California economy is taking longer to recover than the US economy. Remember, we have more healthcare restrictions put in place. We also have an economy that is somewhat different in terms of its economic composition. Some of the hardest hit industries during the pandemic are well represented here in California, and especially in parts of Southern California. So our recovery is going to reflect those differences between us and the US economy. But we're still well on the road to recovery. We're making progress. Our job losses that we saw last year, we've begun to close that gap. We currently have a gap of about 900,000 jobs. We had lost a couple million jobs. So we're moving in the right direction. And based on my calculations, we're adding jobs on average at a rate of about 90,000 per month. So in about 10 months' time, we would expect to close this gap and return to the pre-pandemic job levels that we saw in the state of California. So this is good news. I mean, when you look at the individual industries that are adding jobs, the ones that are leading in terms of industry gains are those industries that we've talked about throughout the pandemic. The hardest hit industries early on, and then those hardest hit industries like leisure and hospitality, where you have restaurants and hotels, entertainment venues. Those firms are hiring, and they're hiring in large numbers. It's a 28%, nearly a 28% increase in jobs just in leisure and hospitality in year-over-year terms for the state of California. Sorry, it's 23%. Other services, another sector that was hard hit, is also seeing substantial gains at this time. Basically, with the exception of finance and insurance, which actually added jobs early on in the downturn, just about every other sector of the economy is adding jobs and doing so at a nice clip. And so for reference, take a look at those notes. On average, California adds jobs at a rate of about 1.3% per year. During the last 5 months of this year, we've been adding jobs at a rate of 5.1% year over year. So our economy is moving rather quickly to eradicate the job losses that we incurred during the course of the early stages of that pandemic. But this is a good time for us to think about our recent experience as kind of like an earthquake. You know, with the initial shock of the earthquake happening back in the early part of 2020, we continue to experience aftershocks with respect to the pandemic as surges and variants show themselves. And so even despite all of these aftershocks, we continue to move forward. We're adding jobs. By this time next year, we should be adding jobs over and above where we were in early 2020 before the pandemic. Now, LA County is slower to recover compared to other parts of the state and compared to the nation. It's recovered 56% of the jobs that it lost during the pandemic in the first part of 2020. We'll hear more about LA County in the next presentation. But as we move away from talking about the California economy to the next topic, which is housing, I just want to close out by showing that California's gross state product or gross domestic product grew at a rate of 8.1% in the second quarter of this year, well above the rate of growth for the U.S. as a whole, which was 6.7%. And it was among the fastest growing states across the 50 states here in the U.S. So no matter what people are saying about how California is performing, the fact of the matter is that it's not only growing faster than the U.S. and many other states, it's made an outsized contribution in terms of job gains to the overall U.S. recovery. So now let's take a look at the final topic, talking about real estate in California. And I want to lead off by making a couple of observations about the statewide market. The median price surpassed $800,000 for the first time earlier this year. So that's good news if you're a homeowner. Home values have been on the rise. Not such good news if you want to be a home buyer or if you're looking to buy a home now. We're now moving into the period of time during the year where home prices are going to drift sideways or maybe edge down because of the drop-off in the demand for homes. So that's one side to this story. The bars that you're looking at in this figure are the monthly sales figures that are seasonally adjusted. And so even though sales this year are up 13% year to date, that's mostly because in 2021 we recovered from the cratering effect that occurred in the first part of 2020. The long-run average of home sales over the last several years really has gone nowhere. When you take a look at this line, this horizontal line that shows the average from 1990 to 2020, home sales are really no higher than they were over that entire 30-year time period, even though we've added substantially to population growth. So there's something amiss here. One of the reasons that home prices have gone up is that we have not seen the kind of turnover and certainly have not seen the number of new homes come forth that we need in light of our population gains. So looking at the existing home market for homes, the median price for LA County, almost $850,000 in the month of October. Look at those rates of change in home prices. We're looking at double-digit increases in home prices. When we shift to 2022 and look ahead to what's going to happen there, we're probably looking at somewhat slower gains in home prices compared to this year. But when you look at sales, sales have already begun to falter, and that's because of declining affordability. And that will continue to be the case in 2022. We think that home sales won't nearly match what we saw in 2021, but we're still going to see home prices advance because interest rates will stay low. And as low as affordability may be, it's still in reasonably good shape by California standards and California standards only. With an affordability reading of 19%, it's down 4 percentage points in the third quarter of this year compared to a year ago. But the rock bottom affordability index figures that we've seen historically are closer to 10 or 11%. So that's what I'm not saying that affordability is great. I'm just saying that it has a ways to go before it actually hits rock bottom. And you're looking at these home price numbers. Compare the home price numbers in LA and Orange County with the home price for US at the very bottom, about $364,000. Our incomes are not terribly different from the US as a whole, but our home prices are quite a bit different. Our monthly payments are quite a bit different, and so the minimum qualifying incomes are generally some multiple of the typical income for a resident in California. So affordability continues to be a problem. It's been a problem for decades here in the state of California. Home prices will continue to rise because inventory continues to be very tight. But I want to show you this one slide that broadens our perspective. It shows new home construction, permitted units in the major metropolitan areas across the country. The largest California MSAs are highlighted here in yellow, and this is through the first half of 2021. If you add up all the permits for all of California's MSAs shown here, it adds up to about 36,000 permits in the first half of this year. By comparison, the Dallas-Fort Worth-Arlington MSA alone added more than 40,000 housing units. So when we take a look at California, a state that has the largest population of any state in the US, and we take a look at our recent performance in terms of the number of new home units that we're building, there's a lot of room for improvement. So in wrapping up, I just want to point out and basically recap what I had said about the US outlook, that the economy is in an expansion mode at this point. We surpassed the previous peak of GDP earlier this year, so now we're climbing more as we move through the rest of the year. We're looking at the fastest rate of growth in GDP here in 2021 that we've seen since the Olympics, the LA '84 Olympics. The unemployment rate is at 4.2%. We talked a little bit about what's happening with the labor market numbers and the Great Resignation, but the job gains have really been remarkable. We're going to recover all the jobs that were lost over the pandemic by the first half of next year. Inflation's elevated, it's modest, but it's going to trend down. And overall, at the national level, we're looking at a good recovery by just about any standard. And California is gaining momentum. The unemployment rate is improving. It's been cut in half. We've recovered about 95% of the pre-pandemic jobs. Those rates of growth that I spoke of overall and by industry have been quite impressive. So we are definitely moving in the right direction. We're making a significant contribution to the job gains nationally. But I'm really concerned about the present and long-term challenge we see in housing. We continue to have a housing affordability problem. It's not just for low income, but all levels of income. We're not producing enough homes to accommodate the population needs that we have. And when you put that together with what I think is going to be an impending labor shortage over the next several years, I think it really poses a question to all of us in California, which is how are we going to maintain our competitive position in the face of both a labor shortage and a housing shortage? It's going to be increasingly difficult for residents of California, for workers that we want to attract or we want to keep here in California to stay here at a time when home prices are high and when the labor shortages are becoming more and more obvious. So thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, Dr. Kleinhans, and a reminder to stick around. He'll join us later in Accelerate Long Beach to answer your questions. Long Beach's landscape is rapidly changing. There are more developments breaking ground now than we've seen in decades, and those developments are translating into more jobs and a higher quality of life for residents who are making Long Beach their home.
City Ventures actually has two upcoming communities in North Long Beach. Edgewood Point is the community that we're currently under construction with, but both communities are going to revitalize. North Long Beach by removing blighted, underutilized parcels and bringing new for-sale housing to North Long Beach Boulevard. North Long Beach has so much, and what we found was that there were some sites that were available kind of north of Bixby Knolls going into Virginia Village. They were actually some former redevelopment agency sites. And so we really kind of worked with the city to imagine how we could bring new for-sale housing to a part of North Long Beach that hadn't seen as much investment.
We realized it was just right on the edge of something, and that's how we came up with the names Edgewood, because it's just right on the edge of downtown. It's right on the edge of Bixby Knolls, so you've got that small town charm, but still the downtown vibe of Long Beach.
Seeing the value that's there. We're one of the earlier investors, and I think as we invest and we kind of prove out the success, I think others will follow. Long Beach is a big city. I think Mayor Garcia often says that it's larger than the city of Atlanta, Georgia, but it has that small town feel. You really feel supported. You feel important when you come to Long Beach. The city is very fortunate to have the economic development group really promoting development. It's really a win to our back. They help solve problems, help us kind of get through some of the city bureaucracy. So that's a huge opportunity for developers that are looking to invest in Long Beach.
There's so much opportunity to create really, really unique floor plans and neighborhoods that can still stay true to the roots of Long Beach, but offer some opportunity for homeowners that may otherwise not exist.
We began in a rented suite in Torrance, and we expanded beyond that a couple of times. We began looking for a place to relocate set up our headquarters, and we selected Long Beach on Long Beach Boulevard just behind us. We grew out of that, and we built and will soon move into this beautiful structure. We chose Long Beach because it offers a lot. The government is forward-thinking and very progressive. Under its current management, under Mayor Robert Garcia, they're really developing the downtown area. Besides that, Long Beach is a great bridge between Santa Monica area and Orange County. So we can recruit from both areas. In today's working remote environment, that gives us even more options. And then the third reason we chose it is that it has a lot of beach. It has a long beach, and it's great for sailing, which is a team building effort that we offer our employees, staff members. With this building, it will mark Long Beach as a high-tech center, and I think it will attract other high technology companies to Long Beach.
I was 23, I got an apartment in Bixby Knolls, and when I was 25, I bought a home right here in North Long Beach. I didn't know what council district it was. I knew that homes were affordable, the neighborhoods were great, but the corridors needed a little bit of help, a little investment. When I joined the city council in 2014, we were the only district in the city that didn't have a Starbucks. We were the only district in the city that didn't have a bank, a library, lots of basic amenities that most neighborhoods take for granted. So we worked on creating a renaissance, shepherding in a renaissance right here in Uptown Long Beach, investing in our public realm, our community centers, libraries, parks, but also attracting private investment into the things that we need as a community: banks, sit-down restaurants, grocery stores, retail. And what we've seen is that if we invest and when we invest in communities like Uptown Long Beach, the entire community, the entire city thrives. In the past several years, North Long Beach has seen significant investments that it hasn't seen in quite some time. From the Michelle Obama Neighborhood Library to 40 new acres of open space at the Forest Wetlands. We're here at Uptown Commons, a great new retail center that offers a bank, a coffee shop, and new local restaurants. But that's not all. Our educational institutions are making significant investments right here into our community. Jordan High School has almost a $200 million investment into rebuilding Jordan High School, performing arts centers, classrooms, while investing in the students as well. And Long Beach City College has a commitment to build an outreach center right here on Atlantic Avenue in North Long Beach. We're making significant investments into our public facilities. The Ron Arias Health Equity Center opens this spring. The DeForest Park Environmental Stewardship Center, a place to help young people learn about environmental conservation and stewardship right here in our community, opens this spring. The North Long Beach community also has significant housing investment on hand. 4 new projects right here in the 90805 community, and one of the most notable is Rhythm. This is 59 townhomes for ownership right here on the Atlantic Avenue corridor, right across the street from the Michelle Obama Neighborhood Library. What's exciting to see is the chain reaction of investment. When you make an investment into an intersection like Atlantic and Artesia, we noticed that all the shopping centers in the area began to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars to improving their own facades and investing in attracting more businesses. And so what you see is a snowball begin to take shape, right? It begins with public investment and public leadership, but then the economic activity brings forward more fruit.
Our next presentation and forecast is from Dr. Seiji Steinmetz, Professor and Chair of Economics and Director of the Office of Economic Research at Cal State University, Long Beach. He first joined the university faculty in 2005 and has been chair since 2016. Prior to his academic appointment, Dr. Steinmetz was a senior economic consultant at Bates White LLC and BW Analytics, where he specialized in litigation consulting and life science analytics. His research expertise is in applied econometrics with an emphasis in transportation, urban, and environmental economics. His research is published in leading economics and interdisciplinary journals, and he's a frequent contributor to publications at the national and local level, including the Long Beach Post and Business Journal. Welcome, Dr. Steinmetz.
All right, thank you for that. Again, I'm Seiji Steinmetz with California State University, Long Beach, and I'm here to talk about what's going on in our region, and in particular, the Long Beach region era economic update I'm going to give you here. And we're going to talk about first Los Angeles County employment, and the reason is because that's where we get the latest and greatest data. Also, Long Beach employment and Los Angeles County employment are pretty closely tied together. We will, of course, get into some specifics of the information we have on the Long Beach employment situation. And then 2 big stories. What's going on over at the ports? What's going on with the cargo backup? We need to talk about that, of course, and we're going to do it in the context of the Port of Long Beach's cargo volumes. And then housing prices and rental prices, what's happening there. So we of course are going to talk about that and give you an idea of what's happening in the housing market in Long Beach. And then finally, we are here largely to gather and talk about real estate and development. So we're going to give you a quick snapshot, a quick overview of what the what the real estate industry in Long Beach looks like and what are some of the development projects underway. So let's start with Los Angeles County employment. Well, employment is recovering for sure. Right now, the Los Angeles County unemployment rate is about 7.8%. That's a little bit higher than the California rate and the US rates that Dr. Kleinhans talked about. We're at about, our unemployment rate is slightly higher than in the state and the nation as a whole, partly because we have a large concentration of industries in leisure and hospitality, so these sort of face-to-face industries, and also motion picture and sound recording is a relatively large part of the Long Beach economy, of the Los Angeles County economy. So we're going to be a little bit higher typically than we see in the state. Just real quick, this blue line right here is showing you the path of unemployment since before the pandemic in Los Angeles County. This gray line is California, and we can see that we track them pretty closely, but just have a slightly higher unemployment rate throughout the pandemic than the rest of the state. So we can frame our discussion of employment in terms of how's the recovery going? Where are we now? And right now, compared to when we first started before the pandemic, right now the number of jobs in LA County is about 5.8% below where it was just before the pandemic started. So it's been a long path, but we're gradually getting back. Right? During the worst of the pandemic, in just a couple of months, we lost over 700,000 jobs. And then up until now, we've gotten back about 467,000 of those jobs. So we've recovered about 64% of the jobs lost during the worst of the pandemic. And again, we are now overall as a county about 6% below where we were before the pandemic started in terms of employment. Now we can also look at what the recovery rate looks like industry by industry. What I'm showing you here are bars that show what is the percentage employment compared to right before the pandemic started. That is, what is current employment looking like as a percentage gain or loss compared to right before the pandemic. We see, for example, transportation and warehousing has not only fully recovered, but we've seen jobs gained, and that corresponds to the increase in retail demand that Dr. Kleinhans was talking about earlier in his talk. The areas that seem to be tracking behind the recovery are mainly accommodation and food service, information, personal care, and other service. Of course, there's state government education. That's on a different budget system. That's a different animal. But some of these categories, for example, personal care and other services, these are your nail and hair salons. These are your parking lots. These are lots of face-to-face, often, lots of face-to-face interaction, lots of small business type of interaction. And they're struggling the most to recover as people are sort of reluctant to get back to their normal routines before the pandemic. The information sector, again, that includes motion picture and sound recording, which has a relatively large share of employment in Los Angeles County. So that's why we might see, as that industry starts to recover, we might see that recovery accelerate a little bit more in the future. And accommodation and food services, now that's a mixed bag. Accommodation, it means mainly hotels and Airbnbs and so forth. Food service is, of course, our restaurants. And what's happening there? Why is accommodation and food service lagging behind the recovery in terms of employment? It's a mixture. People are still reluctant to travel, so tourist-related activities are still slower than in the rest of the economy as we ease our way out of the worst of the pandemic. And in food service, often it's been difficult for the restaurant owners to fill their jobs. So again, it's a mixture, and we could talk a little bit as we proceed through this talk, and later when we sit down with Haley Munguia, we can discuss why that might be the case. So one thing I've been tracking since the beginning of the pandemic, and the beginning of, this is about the 7th time we've talked since the pandemic began, or since right before the pandemic, and I keep reiterating this point that we've still seen a fairly lopsided recovery in terms of employment. What we have here in the green is, think of those as workers in jobs that earn more than typical, technically above median wages. In red, this is the job trajectory of those who earn less than the median, so less than typical wages. So you can think of it as higher income and lower income wage earners. And we see as a percentage of pre-pandemic employment. We see that in the green. Right now, for higher wage workers, we're at about 3.64% roughly less employment than before the pandemic started. But the red bar here, we see that there's been no job growth at all. Right? There's been no employment growth at all in the amongst lower wage earners. In fact, amongst these lower wage earners, employment is down about 28%, and that hasn't changed much since right after the reopening started to begin after the worst of the shutdowns. So when you hear people talk about a K-shaped recovery, you have higher income earners seeing an upward trajectory, steady but upward trajectory of job recovery. For lower income workers, it's been flat or slightly going down, which gives us the up and down legs of that K-shaped recovery. All right, so how does this translate to what's going on in Long Beach? Well, the unemployment rate in Long Beach right now is about 8.5%. Again, that's slightly higher than what we're seeing in the county. The blue line is the unemployment rate since before the pandemic for Long Beach. The black gray line there is Los Angeles County. So we see our trajectory throughout the pandemic in terms of unemployment has been very similar, just slightly elevated above Los Angeles County levels. Note that Long Beach has a relatively high concentration of residents who work in the service sectors, like service industries, and that might explain the small difference between the county and the city's unemployment rate. One thing I'd love to look at is unemployment claims, because initial unemployment claims give me an idea of what kind of unemployment in the city we might expect in the future. It's a forward-looking indicator. And I've been showing this to you for the last year and a half, almost 2 years now. So this pattern should look familiar. But right before the pandemic, if we look at the overall number of unemployment insurance claims in the city of Long Beach, or really filed by City of Long Beach residents, we see we're around 1,700 per month right before the pandemic started. That shot up, and we've gradually seen that dissipate. So right now, as of the end of August, at the end of October, we've seen about twice as many claims per month than we saw right before the pandemic started. One thing to note, importantly, is that in September, we saw the expiration of the federal expanded unemployment benefits, in particular pandemic unemployment assistance, which was offered to small business owners, like sole proprietors and independent contractors. That's a new eligibility that we didn't see before the pandemic. And then also the pandemic additional compensation, that is the federally supplemented unemployment insurance benefits, which increased unemployment benefits during the pandemic. Those expired in September. And the reason it's important to point that out is that there's been some discussion of the extent to which unemployment benefits have been disincentivizing participation in work or participation in the labor force. And if the idea that unemployment benefits were really discouraging people from going back to work, we would expect a large drop-off. Right before and around when those extra benefits expired, we would expect a large drop in new insurance claims, unemployment insurance claims. And we haven't seen that. The rate at which unemployment insurance claims are falling now is about the same as we've seen throughout the trajectory of the recovery. All right, we could also take a look at, in Long Beach, in which industries that residents work in, where are we seeing the largest number of claims? Healthcare and social assistance, that doesn't necessarily mean that nurses are out of work. We know there's a shortage of those. But we consider, for example, that healthcare and social assistance includes child care services. So as people are, again, we're still coming out of the pandemic, but we're still cautious, especially with Omicron possibly lurking. Child daycare services and things like skilled nursing facilities where there's relatively large turnover. We are seeing slightly higher claims rates in that industry. Administrative support and waste, that includes things like building maintenance, janitorial services. So things that are related to what we would, people are slowly coming back to offices, coming back to buildings. We're seeing, again, slight lag in employment in those areas, recovery in employment in those areas. And also note that that category includes travel agencies and tour operations. And then retail trade, as brick and mortar and smaller businesses are trying to get back. And accommodation and food services, as we talked about, are seeing the largest number of claims in Long Beach. Okay, We of course have to talk about, there's an estimated upwards of 100 ships sitting out anchored 150 miles off the coast of San Pedro Bay. We have to talk about what's going on with the cargo backlog. And I want to make this clear from the outset. Long Beach's cargo handling facilities, Long Beach's supply chain and marine cargo handling is not in any way broken. What's happening is there's been an unprecedented surge in the demand for goods, many of which are imported and come through our ports. Understanding again that 40% of all containerized cargo coming into this country come through both the Port of Long Beach and the Port of Los Angeles. So what I'm showing you briefly, I'm stepping out of my lane, Dr. Kleinhans, and going into your national discussion for a second here. Let's look at, for example, just a year or so before a couple of years before the pandemic started, let's look at what total retail sales looked like in billions. We see right here when we get into the second quarter, so right around April of 2021, right, we saw a large increase in retail sales. That's when a lot of us were staying home and starting to buy things. And of course, if you're staying home and buying things, that means you're buying things online or buying more stuff online than before. So during that same period, again, right around the second quarter of 2020, we saw a large increase in the amount of online retail sales. So if we look now, for example, in the third quarter where we are in 2021, compared to the third quarter of right before the pandemic, the third quarter of 2019, there's been a 21% increase in retail sales. And during that same period, a 45% increase in online shopping. So there's this large surge in the demand for stuff. And a lot of that is being online, and a lot of it being purchased online, and a lot of those online purchases are imported goods. So what that translates to then is really record cargo volumes. Here I'm focusing mainly on loaded import cargo volumes. So the green line is the Port of Long Beach's, January 2019 through current, the number of loaded import containers they've been handling. And right around that period where we saw the surge in demand, around April 2020, we saw a big uptick in the amount of import volumes being handled. For reference also, we have the Port of Los Angeles in gray behind here. All right, so the point is that this increase in the amount of cargo that's being handled at the Port of Long Beach is directly tied to the amount of spending that's going on in the economy. There's a great increase in retail trade demand. Importantly, these are cargo volumes that have been moved. This is not a graph of cargo that's sitting out in San Pedro Bay or 150 miles offshore. This is a graph of cargo that's actually been handled and processed and delivered. So again, it's not that the ports are slowing down or restricting or somehow broken in a manner that is stemming the flow of goods into our country. They're handling more and bringing in more than ever before. It's just at this point, with such a massive surge in the demand for these goods, that it's just crowding the facilities. It's just overwhelming the facilities. We're seeing something similar if you look at the Port of Long Beach and the Port of Los Angeles combined, just looking at loaded import cargo volumes, say, during the same period. So if we look January through October in 2019, 2020, and now, we see that import cargo volumes are up over 20%. Again, a massive surge in demand is overwhelming our ports. It's not that they are bringing in less than before the pandemic began. All right, also let's talk about the housing market. Right now, the median price of a home in Long Beach is about $766,000. In fact, if we look at the Los Angeles, Orange County metro area in gray there, the median price is close to $851,000. So what we've seen is right before the pandemic, if we look, for example, at the 2-year change, which gives us a sense of what were housing prices like before the pandemic and currently, Long Beach prices are about 21% higher than before the pandemic started, and slightly higher than the rate of increase we've seen in the LA, Orange County metro area. All right, so housing prices are definitely rising, and we see, again, no surprise, right around second quarter of 2020 is when we started to see a sharp increase. All right, and we could talk a little bit more about this when we sit down with Haley Munguia, but what's happening is its low interest rates have really been driving up housing prices, in addition to a limited housing stock and, of course, an increased demand for housing, all at the same time. All right, rental prices are also rising. And here I don't expect you to read this all right now, but this will be a nice reference for later when you download this deck from our Cal State Long Beach Office of Economic Research website or the Long Beach Economic Partnership website, but we could see how rent prices on average has changed in each zip code in Long Beach. And over the last couple of years, we've seen overall across these different neighborhoods roughly an 8 to 10% increase in rental prices just in the last couple of years. That is, compared before and current, we've seen on the order of 8, 9, 10% increases in rental prices. All right, and finally, we are here to talk about real estate and development. And again, you're going to hear from a lot of experts. You've already heard from a lot of experts about what's going on with development in Long Beach. Let's just give you a rough snapshot of what the industry looks like. There are about 3,300 people employed in Long Beach each year in the real estate industry. So that's about 2% of all private employment in Long Beach. And that's been fairly steady, and it's grown about, in the last 5 years, it's grown about 9%. So we see, compared to some of the other larger, some of the more familiar names we're used to seeing, such as healthcare and social assistance, retail, transportation, warehousing, right? These definitely not as big in terms of employment in those sectors. But if we look at, oh, and by the way, here's a brief breakdown of where people work in real estate. About a quarter are property managers, a little more than a quarter are agents and brokers, and we got close to a third are the landlords, like the lessors of residential and non-residential buildings, and then the rest are in support activities such as appraisers and escrow agents and so forth. But if we look at the real estate industry's contribution to Long Beach's economic activity, so what we like to talk about gross regional product. Think about as the gross regional product of Long Beach is the value of all the final goods and services produced in our Long Beach economy. What I've done is I've shown real estate here generates about $962 million a year, so close to $1 billion a year in economic output, right, in contribution to gross regional product. I've picked some familiar looking industries to give some context to that. We see it's more, for example, than hospitals produce around on the same order as all of our doctor's office, dentist offices, medical labs, outpatient care facilities and so forth. Right, and more than, say, in food and beverage stores and hotels. Right, real estate, in terms of its contribution to our Long Beach economy, is quite large. Again, generating about $1 billion a year in economic activity. And as a quick rule of thumb, for every 100 jobs there are in real estate in Long Beach, that produces or supports an additional 33 jobs in our regional economy based on some preliminary multiplier analysis we've done. All right. One thing, though, is the real estate overview, the employment and contributions to GDP, that kind of understates what having this kind of infrastructure, what Long Beach real estate does for the economy. Because, for example, if there's a tech company in an office space, well, the measure of economic output is going to go to the tech company, not necessarily to the office space that it relies upon. So it's important to talk about what's going on. What are some of the major developments going on in Long Beach right now? And we've got some information thanks to our good friends at the Long Beach Economic Development Department. So if we look at, for example, there are about 93 major real estate investment projects either currently underway or very recently completed. We have about 28 residential projects, 22 commercial, and interesting, we got 30 mixed-use projects and a variety of other real estate projects. Among those is about 7,000 residential units being produced right now, or almost recently completed. About 4,600 of those are in mixed-use developments. And there's another close to 1,000 affordable housing units being developed and another close to 1,000 hotel rooms being developed. All right, so what can we take away from this in brief? Employment. Employment is currently at about 6%. Right? Overall employment in the county is about 6% below its pre-pandemic level. Service industries and those relying on face-to-face interaction are still recovering the slowest. Employment amongst lower wage workers is still almost 30% below its pre-pandemic levels. For Long Beach, unemployment is down to about 8.5%, still higher than the county. Unemployment claims are dissipating, but still twice pre-pandemic levels. What that amounts to is there's about 20,000 Long Beach working residents that still remain unemployed. Port of Long Beach is handling more import cargo than it ever has before. There's a 23% increase in import cargo being handled and processed than before the pandemic. And these record import volumes are being driven by sharp increases in retail sales, especially online shopping. And again, let me reiterate, Long Beach's supply chain infrastructure is not broken. It's simply being overwhelmed by a massive surge in the demand for goods. In the housing market, we see rising housing prices. Like the median home price right now is currently around $767,000. That's over 40% higher than it was 5 years ago. And Long Beach rents are increasing at a greater rate than before the pandemic began. That's due in part to rising home prices. And overall, if we compare where rents are compared to 5 years ago, they're between 21 and 46% higher depending on the neighborhood. And finally, Long Beach real estate is an important sector in the economy, contributing close to $1 billion to our gross regional product. And real estate right now, development is booming. There are about 93 major projects. Mixed-use development is especially strong, with over 30 projects currently underway. And again, about 7,000 new residential units are coming online, which will increase the city's housing stock by around 4%. So with that, thank you again. Go Long Beach, go Beach, and I look forward to discussing all of this with Dr. Kleinhans and Haley Munguia later. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Steinmetz. It's just about time to take your questions. If there's something you'd like to ask of our economic experts, add them in the chat. We're going to head into our studio and be back with you right after this.
Accelerate Long Beach Real Estate and Development is brought to you by the City of Long Beach Economic Development Department, the Downtown Long Beach Alliance, the California State University Long Beach Office of Economic Research, and the Long Beach Economic Partnership. To learn more, visit lbep.org.
And we're back with Dr. Steinmetz and Dr. Kleinhans, who are here to answer your questions on the financial picture in Long Beach and the broader economy. If you haven't already, drop your questions in the chat. So here is our first question. What is causing home prices in Long Beach to rise so quickly, and who is being impacted by rising housing rents? Dr. Steinmetz, would you like to get us started?
Yeah, sure. So I kind of gave a hint when I gave my presentation, but there's been a great deal of expansionary monetary policy during the pandemic to promote economic recovery that Dr. Kleinhans talked about. So in short, that's lowering interest rates and lowering mortgage rates. So when the mortgage rates are lower, that means people shop for houses on their payment. How much am I going to pay per month? Not necessarily the price of the house. So when the interest rates fall, the payment goes lower for a given home price, and so that means you can bid up more, you can bid higher. So you combine that with possibly an increased demand for housing. People are staying at home for a year and a half, and maybe that gets pretty small, or maybe this is the time to move somewhere else. And also, while the housing prices are rising, they can sell and get more for their current house. And then, of course, there's, Dr. Kleinhans talked about this too, there's a limited housing stock, limited turnover. So that all coming together, it's this perfect storm of skyrocketing prices. And I could talk about how that affects rents. I want to give you a chance, though.
Well, yeah, there's one other thing to keep in mind, which I alluded to in a different context, which is the demographic story. So you've got millennials who are in their prime first-time home buying segment of their lives. They're taking advantage of the interest rates that are low. And mind you, the people who are buying homes in California, and historically have done so over the last 10, 15 years, are people that probably have above average incomes, because you saw the affordability numbers, and so there are a lot of them because they've been on the sidelines for a long time. These low rates coupled with these demographic forces have brought them out in force, and they're bumping into the price increases that we've been talking about because of the limited supply of existing homes. And even though we've been constructing units, especially in downtown Long Beach, it's still a very limited increase of supply of new homes compared to what we need to balance things out and bring prices back into line.
Yeah. Now, in terms of what that's doing to the rental market, so Imagine a young couple, like a young professional couple, they're making good money, and they're kind of on that bubble, right? They think, I think we can jump in now, or maybe right before the pandemic they were ready to buy. All of a sudden, housing prices in a year and a half to 2 years go up 20-something%, and they're pushed out of the market. They said, we're going to wait, or I just can't afford that right now. Okay, so now what you have is a relatively well-off couple who is in the rental market. So now you've got people across the income spectrum bidding on the same apartments, more or less. There's a very limited amount of rental real estate. So what's happening is it's the lower income renters are being pushed out. Mm-hmm. And again, this is more anecdotal than anything. It's very hard. It's very hard right now to find a rental property, and the demand is extraordinary. And so if you're a prospective landlord, you're going to start looking at, well, what's the safest bet? And that's going to be a lot of these higher income renters who could otherwise, during normal times, buy a home.
Mm-hmm. And keep in mind that Long Beach is probably one of the more affordable, if not the most affordable beach community, as you look at LA's coast and down into Orange County. So there are people from other parts of Southern California that are going to have their eyes on properties here, not just residents who are looking to, say, trade up or what have you.
So our next question is, how can GDP recover so much faster than the labor market and unemployment rate?
Well, so this happens every time. When we have an economic downturn, recessions, whether they are steep or mild recessions, this economic downturn I'm calling a pandemic disruption because it's not an economically induced downturn, but the symptoms are the same. And one of the symptoms that we see during recovery is that GDP recovers more quickly, that the labor market recovers with a lag, and part of that just has to do with the hiring decisions that businesses have to make. You know, when things are in the during the contractionary phase, people are being laid off. As things get going, firms are going to hang in there with their current staffing to the extent that they can. When they can finally expand, when they see that the signals are out there saying, well, we've got more business to take care of, they're going to hire people maybe first on a part-time basis, or they might hire people on a contractual basis or temporary basis. Then eventually they start talking about hiring people on a full-time basis, maybe converting workers who were contract workers into employees, maybe giving part-time employees more full-time hours. All of those things take time and move a lot more slowly than the overall response that we see in the form of GDP. So that's really all of those different dimensions contribute to the slower pace of recovery in the labor market. And then we've got this confounding effect right now from the pandemic and some of the demographics that I described.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And Dr. Steinmetz, you mentioned that the supply chain infrastructure is being overwhelmed by a massive surge in the demand for goods. So what is causing that massive surge in demand?
All right, so think about what we were doing for the last 18 months to 2 years. It started with during the quarantines, right? A lot of us who would have otherwise spent money out at the restaurants or on travel, like vacations, we have some of that purchasing power still if we were fortunate enough to keep our jobs. And you're going to put that somewhere, just as an economic human. And so a lot of people substituted out of face-to-face purchasing and sort of vacation or purchasing experiences to purchasing goods. And that's what I showed in my graphs with a large increase in retail demand corresponding really to pretty early in the pandemic. So we saw this uptick and then like a structural increase, like a large increase in both retail and online shopping really before the economic recovery started. So I guess I'm giving you a long way of saying a lot of pent-up demand. And now as things start to open up, still there's a lot of purchasing power out there, and also the stimulus spending to some extent. Stimulus relief has put a lot of purchasing power in people's hands that might not have been there otherwise.
And we're still not really consuming services to the degree that we have before the pandemic. If you take a look at the split, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think our spending profile is maybe 60% services, 40% goods at the national level. And so if we saw that we had to pull back in our consumption of services, restaurants, trips, plane flights and the like, going to theme parks, any number of other kinds of things, and we still want to do stuff, So we're going to do it with we're going to buy goods, and I think we're still working our way through that that backlog, if you will. It'll be when we finally, take that trip that involves a flight as opposed to a trip by car. Then we're going to really see the services side of our economy begin to take off again. Hopefully, offsetting what's likely to be a slowdown in our goods consumption that we're experiencing right now.
Yeah, and one thing I want to reiterate too along these lines is that there's more coming in than ever before. Right? There still seems to be a perception in some parts of our communities that whatever's happening, whatever supply chain issues there are at the ports is restricting the amount of the flow of goods into the country. It's going to ruin Christmas, right? And I can't stress enough, the ports are handling and bringing in more volume than they ever have before, right? So they're just having trouble keeping up with really an unprecedented surge in demand.
Okay. And another concern that we're hearing a lot about is the threat of higher inflation. So do you have a sense about like how long that may last?
You want me to go for that one? Sure. Okay. So yes, we're looking at elevated levels of inflation right now, as you saw in my presentation. By historic standards, by recent historic standards, these are high rates of inflation. They're in the mid-single digits to the high single digits. The evidence, when you look at the producer price index, is that upstream prices are coming down, which is going to be better for consumer prices going forward. And also, as I mentioned, it's a good idea to look at the things we buy a lot of, but happen to be volatile as far as their prices are concerned, and that's food and energy. You take out that component of inflation, and you've got an inflation that comes closer to coming back down to earth, especially as we look out over 2021 and into 2022. But when you look at the fundamental things that are going to be driving inflation in the foreseeable future, I talked about energy prices. They will come back down to earth. There are supply chain problems that are disrupting that sector of the economy. There are supply chain problems that are affecting other parts of the economy as it relates to goods and so on. Certainly the increase in the demand for labor because of these labor shortages has given rise to higher wages, but that's just one component of the overall inflation picture. So I do think that inflation's going to not be as bad as people think it's going to be over the long term. We've stopped using the word transitory because it just doesn't seem to mean anything. But we're looking at modest inflation through at least the first part of next year, and then it's going to improve, I would say, by the time we get to this time next year. And it's probably no longer going to be a story on the headlines and front pages of the papers.
Got it. Okay. And Dr. Steinmetz, you showed that accommodation and food service employment is lagging behind in the recovery. I see so many help wanted signs at restaurants. So do you have a sense of why restaurants are having such a hard time finding employees?
Yeah, I think the short answer is there are so many opportunities for restaurant workers to substitute out of and do something else. So if you think about look at what's happening with this booming trade volume, right, there are a lot of warehouse jobs that can be filled immediately. And for some people, imagine someone who worked in a restaurant prior to the pandemic. There's a quarantine, there's a shutdown, they're struggling sort of to keep up and also have time to do some introspection. And all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, eventually things start to open up and there are all these different job opportunities out there. They've had time to reassess and say, do I really want to go back to that job, or can I take a higher paying job, maybe with more flexible hours or better pay? Maybe their childcare situation makes other types of jobs more attractive. I mean, that's really, it's a very, very tight labor market, lots of opportunities. And I'm glad you're asking that because, again, there seems to be a narrative that the unemployment benefits are really just disincentivizing all kinds of work. And that may be true in some part. There may be a distribution of effects, right? And maybe that's true for some. But I think people need to go and talk to someone who's been surviving just on unemployment benefits for the last year and a half and see how great that is and whether or not they wanted to get back to work. It's a lot of people, what I think is happening is a lot of people who used to work in restaurants are working at warehouses or in logistics or maybe even going into education right now or retooling right now.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And Dr. Kleinhans, our next question is for you. It appears that the economy is well along the road to a full recovery at this point. So can another pandemic surge, whether due to the Omicron variant or some other development, could that cause a recession?
This is a good question because I think there's still quite a bit of uncertainty about the current economic situation, and it's stemming largely, well, partly from these supply chain problems and labor market problems we've discussed, but fundamentally it's stemming from the continued presence of the pandemic. I think our experience over the last several months tells us that we can continue to grow as an economy and continue to expand in terms of GDP, to recover in terms of the labor market, even as we work our way through these aftershocks of the pandemic that we're experiencing right now. So I think it may temper some of the advances that we make to deal with the Omicron variant now and maybe some surges in the future, but I don't think it's going to stop us in our tracks. I think the economy will continue to grow. I'm starting to hear concerns about a recession in the foreseeable future, and I mean, yeah, there's always going to be another recession somewhere out there, but we're on a growth streak right now. We're adding jobs in California, 5.1% year over year. That's 4 times our usual average. The U.S. is growing at the fastest rate that it's grown since 1984. So, I mean, I look at the numbers. I try not to listen or look too much at the headlines that capture our attention, but they oftentimes leave things out of context. So I think we'll manage our way through, but we can't let our guard down.
Got it, okay. And here in Long Beach, there are a number of mixed-use development projects underway. So what are the economic benefits of mixed-use development?
So, Long Beach is a special area. It's a very attractive area, but there's only a limited amount of space. And so when you don't have a lot of space to horizontal sort of development, an efficient thing to do is develop vertically. And so what's kind of exciting about that is you can create an efficient, you can use land more efficiently if you were to do mixed-use development such as commercial space underneath, right? We've seen this a lot more in downtown where there's nice apartments above some retail space or commercial space, right? And that seems to be a trend that's reshaping Long Beach's landscape, especially the downtown area. And quick plug, by the way, if you want to know a lot more about what's going on in downtown, check out the Downtown Long Beach Alliance's website. They have really good economic update information. So DLBA, check that out. Really good information about what's happening downtown. So a big benefit is really more efficient land use, ability to do more with a given amount of horizontal space. And then if that works, if you have enough of that and you have a community built around that, you can do more here in Long Beach than, say, traveling elsewhere for it or traveling even across the city. So there's an economic benefit in terms of reduced pollution. It's better for the environment the more we can aggregate our activities together.
Mm-hmm. This idea of a mixed use is, it's actually an old idea that's been resurrected as we have conducted more real estate development to fill in areas, especially like here in the case of Long Beach. And it works. I mean, you've got a daytime working population that can occupy the retail and office establishments and maybe make use of the parking that's available, whether it's public parking or on-site. And then in the evening, when those individuals go back home, you've got residents who can do the same with those parking facilities and so on. And it's also an opportunity for us to increase density in areas which means creating more housing units that more people can afford in areas that can accommodate that while also maintaining the character of some of the other communities and neighborhoods here in Long Beach that are more single family in nature. So it's definitely a step in the right direction. And we need the units. If we want to grow as a city in terms of our economy, we need to be an attractive place for people to both live and work. We spoke earlier about housing affordability, and if home prices are high, young workers may choose not to live here. So this is not just about housing people, but it's also about ensuring that our economy in Long Beach is going to grow in the foreseeable future.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, now I think we can go on to some questions that we got in the chat. So California's unemployment rate is way below the national statistics. Can you talk about why that is?
Well, California's unemployment rate is higher, 7.3% compared to 4.2% in the most recent time periods for which we have data. And part of the reason for our higher unemployment rate does have to do with the mix of industries that we have. we had a higher exposure, if you will. Well, we have a higher concentration of the hardest hit industries like leisure and hospitality. So we're talking about restaurants, hotels, tourism-related activities. We have a relatively higher presence of other services, which is another face-to-face kind of sector that includes hair parlors and what other kinds of things, massage parlors and nail salons, those kinds of things. So a lot of the reason why we have higher unemployment rates here in California at the present time has to do with that. But do keep in mind, historically, California's unemployment rate is always higher than the nation as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And how do we see the U.S. stimulus affecting the recovery differently from what the EU did?
Well, this is a very difficult question to unpack because it's not just the stimulus policy, but the way we handled the benefits to households and workers is quite different. Institutionally, European nations were better, I shouldn't say better, but they were differently equipped to backfill lost wages and things like that. So it's a kind of a difficult comparison to draw. I'm sorry, I'm not really able to answer the question directly. So
Answering that question will generate 50 to 100 different PhD dissertations in the coming years. It's a great question, but not something that we can answer right now on the couch.
Right. Okay.
But I would say that we typically come out of recessions in the United States faster than our European trading partners. It appears as though we're doing somewhat better now than our European trading partners in terms of dealing with the pandemic. And quite frankly, I don't know exactly how our dollar figure of stimulus money matched up against the EU countries' stimulus funds. But I will say this, I think that every country learned its lesson during the Great Recession about not doing enough to backfill the decline in economic activity when things get tough. So, I mean, I've got to credit the leaders of all these countries for making things happen in terms of these stimulus funds.
Maybe one thing I'll add is something to keep an eye on for these students who are going to be writing their dissertations in the future is the extent to which we relied on quantitative easing, so printing money, or expansionary monetary policy that is essentially like printing money. That's happened on an unprecedented scale, and we don't really know what the long-term effects of that are going to be. Mm-hmm. So, and there's been different rates of that between the U.S. and the EU. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. And back to housing, can you talk a little bit about Long Beach's policy on ADUs, how many have been built, and how that factors into the housing picture here?
So, yeah, I honestly, I don't know. I mean, that's a fairly new, there's a Senate bill talking about relaxing permitting requirements, which will make making ADUs easier to build and quickly. I don't know how that's actually taken into effect, so I don't know how many units there are. I don't know if Long Beach has an official stance on ADUs, but I knew, so sorry, that's kind of a non-answer, but it's kind of a touchy subject because it really depends on what the makeup of the, what is the, let's take Lakewood, for example. Lakewood's a bedroom community. They supply homes and labor to the rest of the region, right? And, they might have a different stance about what that does to their neighborhood feel compared to, say, what Long Beach's stance might be.
So first of all, my wife reminds me that I don't know everything, and this is a really good time to trot out that observation. With respect to Long Beach ADUs, I know that we are authorizing ADUs here in Long Beach. I know that when these bills were discussed in Sacramento, some estimates indicated that even if we increase the number of ADUs statewide by a reasonable amount, it's not really going to put a dent in our housing shortfall. So from a housing policy perspective, it's a step in the right direction, but I think it's hardly going to be the solution that we need to turn to, whether it's in Long Beach or across the state, to address the housing shortfall and high home prices that we've been facing for so long.
Maybe I'll just add, there's about 175,000 housing units in Long Beach. So if you think about, compared to that, if you were to add a few ADUs, where is that in the big picture? Right. And it's gonna, I don't think there's enough space in backyards to build enough ADUs to have a major impact on that.
All right, well with that, I think we're out of time. So thank you both so much for joining us today and participating in our Q&A. And when we come back, Marty Borko from Urban Land Institute Los Angeles, Alan Pullman from Studio 111, and Linda Tatum, Assistant City Manager, will dive deeper into the Long Beach real estate boom. But first, let's look at how city business-friendly initiatives are paving the way for new development.
Welcome to Long Beach. My name is John Keisler, and I am your Economic Development Director. And if there's one thing that I love, it's cranes. Big cranes, little cranes. Check out the size of these things. They move stuff, they carry stuff, and they build great projects. We have got holes in the ground, we've got dump trucks, we got guys running around with yellow hats everywhere. I'm standing in the middle of $500 million worth of projects and 1,000 new residential units. I would like for you to join me on a tour to see some of the great projects breaking ground in Long Beach today. Welcome to Long Beach. My name is John Keisler, and I'm the Economic Development Director. What we do in economic development is help people make more money. So whether you're a small business, an investor, you're into real estate, or maybe starting a new company, we want you here. Reason there's so much noise going on around me is because we're experiencing one of the greatest building booms in our city's history. And I'm surrounded by 5 projects right now that have over 1,000 new residential units, new ground floor retail, and 200 new hotel rooms, including a 5-star boutique hotel just down the street. So if you want to see these cranes firsthand, if you want to see hammers swinging, this is one of the most exciting cities in America. We are currently implementing a 10-year strategic blueprint for economic development. The mayor and city council took bold actions about 5 years ago to pass this plan, which would stimulate lots of new investment in real estate, streamline our processes, hire new staff, to help developers and investors navigate building a project here. What that's done is that's allowed for a lot more projects to move through the process. The city has sold over 150 individual government-owned parcels and put those in play for private sector real estate development. Now that's lowered the costs for developers, it's increased the speed for development so investors can get their return, and it's also created thousands of new residential units and opportunities for new housing and workers to fill our great businesses here in Long Beach. One of the most exciting things about this building boom that we're seeing in Long Beach is that it's all over the city across all different sectors. So not only do we have residential construction in the downtown, but we have massive construction of industrial facilities. Around the airport is a good example of the largest expansion of tech and manufacturing with Space Beach. We also have residential and retail projects building in North Long Beach. The Uptown Commons is a good example, or on the Lower East Side, the new 2nd and PCH project, which is one of our most exciting high-end developments for retail. This is an exciting time for Long Beach residents. Not only are they seeing great new companies come into the city, and tech companies like Zwift or aerospace companies like Relativity Space opening up new facilities. That means jobs, but it also means new residents who are able to fill many of these new residential units. For many years, we saw these vacant lots not developed. So there's a tremendous amount of energy. There's a temporary disruption, of course, for the noise and the dust caused by all these construction workers. But at the other end of this, I think there's a great amount of pride that investors and developers want to come here and build in the city of Long Beach.
Good morning. My name is Marty Borko, and I'm the Executive Director of the Urban Lands Institute's Los Angeles District Council. This morning, we'll be having a conversation with 2 leaders of the Long Beach community to discuss their perspectives on the state of the city. Let me first have them introduce themselves. Linda?
Good morning. I'm Linda Tatum, Assistant City Manager for the City of Long Beach, formerly Development Services Director.
Alan?
Hi, I'm Alan Pullman. I am the founding principal of Studio 111, and we're located here in downtown Long Beach, and we're integrated practice of architecture, urban design, and planning. It's great to be here with two of my favorite people, Linda and Marty.
Thanks, guys. So Long Beach is one of the key drivers of our regional economy. And as such, the real estate market plays a pretty important role both locally and regionally. Our region's economic growth has been driven over the last 5 or 10 years by the entertainment industry with content creation and tourism, by logistics, the movement of goods and services, and by biotech, both research and development. Can each of you talk a little bit about how these industries have influenced the real estate market in Long Beach? And if there's any other industries that have a big impact here that might help differentiate Long Beach from our larger regional community?
You want to start?
Sure. You talked about 3 really critical industries to the city. Biotech, which is something that the city is really looking to get more into, and with 5 local hospitals, that's something that we really feel like the city has a really good base to start from. We've built, probably in the last couple of years, we've probably built more than a couple of million square feet of new logistical operations here in the city. So that's another area where the city is constantly investing in, and we're obviously encouraging more, especially as I guess the logistics industry is kind of, it's pretty superheated right now. And there are some challenges, but we're really happy to have a really good solid foundation in the city for the square footage and attracting logistics businesses. And the third one, tell me again, Marty?
Biotech, logistics, and the entertainment industry, both content creation and tourism, obviously.
The entertainment industry, obviously we have several major regional and we like to say international attractions, starting with the Queen Mary, of course, which the city is looking at kind of resetting with that, due to the city's recent acquisition of that in city hands, taking it over from the previous lessee. The other major areas we have, of course, is the convention center. We have a couple of major theaters here with the International City Theater, of course, the Terrace Theater. So the city really thrives because of its really strong tourist. We really thrive on tourism. It's one of the city's major industries, so we really look to build on that in as many ways as we can. So we feel that we'll just continue to invest in that, but we're also looking at strengthening the city's culture as well. Some of the city's cultural enterprises, we invest really heavily in the arts. You talked about content creation, and we feel that the local cultural and artist scene in the community is something that we really want to continue to invest in, using city funds and even some of the Long Beach reinvestment funds that we recently got from the federal government. We're using that to support a local artist, so we can really strengthen some of the content creation.
Great. Alan, thoughts about?
Well, when I first started here in Long Beach, it was emerging out of a period where the Navy base closed and there was aerospace contraction, and the city realized it didn't have a resilient economy. It didn't have a diversification. So I remember city leaders really talking about diversifying the economy through trade, tourism, and technology. And I think it is a much more diverse economy than it was back in the 80s and 90s. And I think you see that. Education is a big factor here with Cal State Long Beach and City College. Healthcare, obviously, with Memorial Hospital and all of the facilities that emerge around that. Linda talked about tourism, and which has also grown a lot over the years. So I think what you see is a much more diverse economy. Obviously, aerospace contracted, Boeing left, and I was part of working on the Douglas Park Master Plan, repositioning 600 acres and what to do with it. Should it be mixed use? Should it be office? And it ended up being more of an office logistics, but it's actually been one of the most successful things I think the city has done, and it's attracted this new generation of aerospace, which is rocket science, in a really big way. I think that's really been a very exciting development for the city. I think the other thing about Long Beach and the real estate market that's important to understand is that actually most people that live in Long Beach actually work outside of the city. They go to other jobs, and they are able from Long Beach, which has an exceptionally great location, to access this very dynamic regional economy. There's job centers in Orange County, downtown LA, the South Bay that are very easily accessed from Long Beach. So people sometimes live here, but they also work outside, come back to Long Beach to spend their money, which is actually great for our local economy. And I think you see that in just the rising desirability of Long Beach residential neighborhoods.
And I just want to add on one of the things that you said, Alan, about the emerging economy of the rocket science industry. That's something that didn't happen just by accident. I think due to a really strong economic development staff, the city actually went out and courted and looked for those actual that new industry, and we actually kind of worked with them, and I think one of the major things that attracted them is the city has a really strong partnership with local educational institutions. You mentioned it, Alan, and one of the things that we pride ourselves on is attracting new industries that we can support them with job training through our economic development department, our workforce development team. They're really strong. They go out, they look for new industries and partner with those industries to provide training for the workforce that they may need both through the workforce development as well as through our really strong partnerships with our local educational institutions.
So to build upon that idea, talk a little bit about some of the other key elements of both leadership from a government point of view and a business point of view, some of the governance issues of entitlements and getting projects going, and as you mentioned, the workforce. What is it special about Long Beach that helps attract new development and retain and grow some of the existing businesses that are here?
I have to say that I think that's one of the key things that the city has that I've not seen in many other cities, and I've been in the development, in planning and development for many years. The city really strongly believes in, we know that when you have developers, they look for predictability. They look for time is money. So the quicker they can get projects in and developed, I think it's important to them to look for markets where they can go in and have some predictability. So I think the city has worked over the last, I'm going to say probably more than 10 years now, worked on refining the process and making sure that when projects come in, we work closely with the developer. And the city council really strongly supports having a long-term plans that once the plan has been adopted by the city council, the city staff generally supports the projects that come in when those plans are compliant with the plan. And I have to say that our downtown plan has been a model. It allows fairly dense development activity, and so we really support it when a development project comes in, when it's high quality and it adds and contributes to the community. The city really supports it. The city, meaning the city council, the city staff worked with developers to make sure that we get a good quality project.
So, Alan, from your perspective on the private sector and how are those things play out, and what role does the private sector play in kind of that kind of leadership within the community?
Well, as far as real estate development, I would agree with Linda. I get a chance to work at cities, throughout the region, and Long Beach is fairly straightforward. Mm-hmm. There is predictability. There are plans that are in place that have environmental impact reports already, so you don't have to go through this very long and contentious and difficult process. So I think the downtown plan is a great example of a plan that's really created exactly the intent of the plan, which is development in this transit-rich downtown area. I think there are also a lot of great partnerships in Long Beach, whether it's the Long Beach Economic Partnership, which is new, which is really a citywide effort to do things that the city itself can't do in terms of branding the city and pushing forward on economic development initiatives, to the smaller business improvement districts. And I know we have a great community of business improvement districts that are looking to revitalize corridors and really create a lot of synergy between private business owners, the city, and the community.
So one of the great opportunities, it seems to me, in Long Beach, both in the downtown and across the city, and you guys both alluded to it a little bit, is taking advantage of kind of the adaptive reuse of existing building and larger sites, whether it's the old aviation sites or downtown, Alan, like your offices, and what's going on in the downtown in terms of actually adaptive reuse of existing building stock with some wonderful old buildings and creating place out of that. Talk maybe a little bit about those opportunities.
Well, in downtown, one of the things that we've been doing over the last 10 years is there were a lot of surface parking lots. It wasn't exactly the most vibrant downtown in terms of the placemaking. So a lot of the developments that you see that have gone up over the last 10 years have been taking existing surface parking lots and repurposing them for mixed-use development. I know we're working on one right now, and Linda was a really instrumental part called West Gateway, which is a very large parking lot behind the World Trade Center, which was originally going to be more office, but that really doesn't make as much sense. So now we're completing it as a mixed-use district with 700 units of housing and some retail. And that's just been a surface parking lot that's been there for many years. I think that's been the easy, low-hanging fruit. Now we're seeing the adaptive reuse of obsolete retail buildings like our office, which was part of what was once Long Beach Mall and then became City Place. And now it's going through another transition. We're working on adding even more mixed-use buildings. Right now, there's still a lot of pretty low intensity one-story retail buildings that are going to get converted into mixed-use buildings, housing above retail. We took a big box store that was vacant for many years and turned it into our own creative office, and I think that's a model that other people are replicating throughout the city. So I think you're seeing this infill, and I think what makes downtown great is it does have new buildings, historic, really charming older buildings, and it creates a very amenity-rich location to live and to work, and also to come and shop and dine.
And just to add to that, in terms of the adaptive reuse, I think the city probably, after the city of LA had a lot of good successes, I think when you look at LA, you can look at the, I'm going to call it the repopulation of downtown was based upon their adaptive reuse that allowed the old office buildings to be converted to residential uses. And I think we took a page from that book and have a very generous adaptive reuse, because as we know, parking is always an issue, particularly in a downtown, a densely developed area. And the city's adaptive reuse ordinance does something really unique. It says that if you have an existing building, you don't have to add parking for the use. And a typical use, you'd have to add significant amounts of new parking. For adaptive reuse, you don't have to do that. So that's a major incentive for a developer that wants to come into an old building that's sitting there vacant and unused. And we've had some incredible examples. The what we call the old Verizon building on Ocean Boulevard, right at Ocean and Pacific, is now going to be a condo project. It's in development right now. We've had a couple of ghost kitchens that were formerly, one was an old industrial building in the Wilmore district, and another one that's in the downtown area. It was a former office building. It'll now be a ghost kitchen. And we've had many other examples of adaptive reuse that have really contributed to that rich diversity that Alan talked about in the downtown area with the transit. So we think Long Beach, particularly downtown, but even outside of downtown, that the adaptive reuse gives us some very unique opportunities to reuse some of the gorgeous old historic buildings in the city.
So switching gears a little bit, because we would be remiss if we did not talk about this, that housing and homelessness are impacting us across the state. How is Long Beach focused on helping deal with the critical issues, both meeting the RENA goals for new housing and providing permanent and supportive housing for homeless population?
Well, homelessness, we know it's a national issue, it's a state issue, and of course the housing issue or the housing crisis just exacerbates that. But I would like to say that essentially Long Beach took the bull by the horns quite some time ago, and we've had a very aggressive approach to addressing and working with and providing services to the homeless. About 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago now, the mayor created an Everyone Home task force. He did something that was pretty unique, which is to pull together all segments of the community, nonprofits, hospitals, educational institutions, community organizations, and of course the city, pull together a team. And the team worked probably close to a year developing a long-term plan for how the city, with many partners, would try to address the homelessness. And one of the goals of that plan was to produce 500 housing affordable units for the homelessness over the course of the next 5 years. And I'm pleased to say that we've already accomplished that goal. But importantly, it's something that, because of the importance to the city of addressing that issue, we also appointed a deputy city manager specifically focused on the effort to coordinate all of the different resources that are needed to address homelessness. So I would say that the city very aggressively addresses the issue in a very comprehensive way through our Health and Human Services Department. We are a continuum of care that's a federal designation, which automatically entitles the city to federal, but also state funding to provide services to support the homelessness and addressing some of the critical issues. So I would say annually we probably receive about somewhere in the neighborhood of $77 million, and the vast majority of that is spent on housing services for them, whether it's vouchers for emergency housing. The city has purchased a 125-bed and I think this was something that was unique for the city to actually purchase its own permanent housing location for homelessness. So we have really taken the bull by the horns, and we're aggressively addressing that. And recently the city has just recommitted itself to just looking at new ways to really just kind of hone in because of some of the quality of life issues that have been presented. It's been really critical that we really start to address some of those homelessness. So with our Long Beach Recovery Act funds, we're devoting close to $5 million to specifically address some of the quality of life issues, including cleanups and the like, just to address that issue as well.
And then housing affordability. It's a big issue regionally. One of the things Long Beach was known for, and an advantage was it was relatively affordable, the most affordable waterfront city in the region. But I think that's changing, and house prices and rents are outpacing the region. So I think the city is taking some proactive measures. We just recently adopted an inclusionary housing ordinance, meaning, and it's really mostly for the downtown and along the Long Beach corridor, where there's been a high demand. It means that when you build new housing, you have to have a percentage that is at affordable levels. And the city just very recently adopted a density ordinance, which basically allows development outside of the downtown and Long Beach Boulevard to increase density in exchange for more affordability. And I think what's great about that ordinance, and I've been looking at it, is it actually targets middle and moderate income, which is very hard to get funding for. And so that really might give us more affordable housing options into the future.
It will, and that is critical, Alan and Marty, because the city has a very, I think our RHNA allocation, that's the Regional Housing Needs Allocation that comes from the Southern California Association of Governments. It's a pretty hefty number this year. It's over 26,000. So we recently adopted the housing element. It'll have to come back to council for final adoption, but we've adopted a version of that does provide sites primarily, as you mentioned, along our transit corridors and in the downtown area. But also we're looking to diversify and spread that out throughout the city. So always looking for opportunities, and it will be a challenge, but we think that based upon the housing element that the city has adopted, that we'll make every effort to achieve those goals.
So as we wrap up, looking into the future, I mean, one of the great opportunities that we have in our region is the upcoming Olympics. And so as we talk about all the things going on today, but as you have an eye to the future, what is it about the Olympics that's going to have Long Beach be able to stand out and take advantage of the world seeing our city?
I just think it's the beauty of the city. Alan mentioned it. We're an oceanfront city. We have a really beautiful, just a coastline. We have things that would be really attractive to the visitor in the way of entertainment with the Queen Mary, with the convention center and the activities there. So we think that it'll be a really great opportunity for the media to focus on the city and just promote all of the very attractive tourist and leisure activities that the city provides. Everything from the pools, we have the downtown, which is very vibrant. We have great restaurants, just tons of entertainment. So it'll be a great opportunity for us.
Yeah, the spotlight is going to be in Long Beach. I think Long Beach have the second most events outside of downtown Los Angeles. So definitely we're going to get some attention. The mayor announced like 8x28, which is a version of some infrastructure improvements that are going to happen hopefully before the Olympics. I think it's a really great chance to rethink our waterfront, which is our biggest attribute. And a lot of those improvements are going to be on the waterfront. And I look forward to the day when this area of the waterfront really becomes the world-class waterfront that we all know it can be.
And let's not forget that great Long Beach Airport,
Yes.
which is one of our 8x8, 8x28.
Yeah.
We are working on some major enhancements to the airport. It's already a world-class airport, but we're making it even better.
It is going to get better.
Listen, I want to thank you both. Really great, engaging conversation. I learned a lot about all the things going on in Long Beach, and I hope all of you that are listening have a chance to see some really good insights with some really smart people about what's going on in the city. Thanks again.
Thank you, Marty, Alan, and Linda. And thank you to all of our guests who joined us today to share their expertise. Make sure to follow us at LBE Partnership on social media and subscribe to our newsletter at lep.org to get updates on business-friendly initiatives and information on our next Accelerate Long Beach event.